Welcome back to another episode of The Lofty Lender. This week's episode is another homebuyer edition where we explore tips, tricks, and stories that can help you plan for your next home purchase. Whether you're a first-time homebuyer, a move-up buyer, an investor, or just looking to learn, we hope you gain a little knowledge today. Today's episode is going to be all about time of transfer inspections, or as our good friend Jason likes to call them, tater tots. Charlie, what do you know about tater tots?
That's tater tots. I put them in my pocket and save them for the bus ride.
Don't take my tots.
Oh, that's awesome.
What do you know about time of transfers instead of those tater tots?
It's one of those things that a lot of people don't realize how much the Iowa DNR really care over the last few years. And so there's been a lot of court because there's so many old systems that they just don't want poo water going where it shouldn't go.
And for those that are unfamiliar with why Charlie's talking about poo water and tater tots in the same paragraph, I guess, the time of transfers are an inspection that you have to do when you sell your house. And it is a mandatory evaluation required by Iowa law that ensures the system for poo, as Charlie says, is functioning properly and compliant and within government regulations. So why, I guess it's pretty obvious why a home buyer should care, Charlie, but why does a buyer care if a tot is good or if it's not good?
Honestly, it's the same thing as everything else we deal with, Kyle. We don't want a surprise expense, especially when you look at septic can be a very big expense. So knowing what the rules are, doing the right steps. So when you do acquire your property, you know what condition is, you know what projects you need. You don't have a 10 to 20 some $1,000 expense because you hurried through and didn't follow what the DNR requires to make sure that that septic system is safe and ready and compliant.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a few examples on why the time of transfer is important is if you think of it like a used car inspection, that used car, me personally, I'm always scared to buy a used car. Like that's all I've ever purchased, but I'm always scared to buy one because it might look fine on the outside. I don't know enough about cars to be dangerous. Really the same thing about houses. I've owned a house for 10 years and I don't know enough about looking at the mechanics of that house to be dangerous, but that time of transfer really is them doing that detailed search of your septic system to make sure that you're not buying a lemon, just again from that financial aspect you're talking about.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I mowed in high school. We mowed in an area that had no public sewers, all septic, beautiful homes. I tell you what, those things weren't installed right or they weren't maintained right. You'd actually have a water bed in the backyard and it was awful.
It's just scary.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's murky water that's going to end up coming out of there. And nobody wants to have their house not usable because stuff's not going down the pipes. It wants to come back up or just cause you bigger problems. That's not what anybody wants. And the environmental stuff. You don't want to contaminate the stream with what the septic is filtering out. That's why it's there.
This whole episode's making me rethink why we shot it or doing it. Talking about poo water is really not an exciting topic, but unfortunately, it's reality, right? I think there's an entire industry built around poo water, if you will, and making sure that there's not any issues. So, Charlie, have you ever had a situation where it was an issue?
Quite a few. I mean, we had so many buyers that are excited to get into the house and they just want to put through and get to the end zone and then deal with problems later. And you don't want that. I mean, right now, I think we had one last summer, even very recent. They've had two septics. They only thought they had one septic. Then both of them were done. And so not only did you have a $20,000 concern, they had a 40. And then where they're at, it's actually about 50 because it was a very challenging area and leach field where it's supposed to, drain out and be safe and take its time. It didn't work very fast. So it had to be corrected. And so that was a scary one because they literally doubled and went beyond that for what, a normal expectation would be for a sewer cost or a septic cost if you had to redo it. But I think my favorite one was a family transaction. And a lot of things end up being exempt when you're doing things with family. And it had been exempted for years on that same old farmstead. And a nephew finally bought it. And a nephew is not close enough blood relatives. So they finally had to have the DNR certify that the septic was okay. This house didn't have anything other than a pipe. And it cracked me up at closings. We made sure the money was there. So the aunt selling for the nephew and It was all compliant, and he didn't have the funding, he didn't have the money. But at closing, he's like, yeah, my uncle always said, don't play on that hillside. Hell, I mean, I just exited and flowed down the hill. It's like, oh, that's terrible. That kid, great job saving. I mean, it was a great first house for him as a family house he loved, but he did not have the money to fix, let alone install brand new. And so it had a very expensive septic go in, but knowing it ahead of time, following the right rules, the aunt made sure it was all set right, but he rolled it into his loan. So everybody was happy and it was functioning to where he didn't have that big expense that he couldn't have afforded if he hurried through the system and didn't do it.
I can only imagine he's a kid and he's like, man, why is there no snow on this one part of the hill? Uncle Bob, I want to ride down my sled, but there's no snow over here. We just got 4 inches. What happened?
Man, I just can't imagine. I mean, as long as it's been to where we've had septics, and it's changed over the years, but they have a height. I've heard of stories, but I didn't think there'd be any of those left. So apparently there's still are.
It's funny. Well, we have heard some whisperings, bringing this into kind of current events. We've heard some whisperings that one of the counties nearby is going to step out of being in the middle of the process. Right now, the county typically steps in and says, hey, this time of transfer is bad. And so therefore, we need to have it remedied before the closing can happen. It's really that seller's responsibility to make sure that the property is good to go before they sell it. The rumblings have been recently that the county is going to step out of being in the middle. The county no longer wants to field those calls. They no longer want to be that one that holds up the process. Now, the DNR is still going to require that this be taken care of, but it does cause a little concern for me that either people are going to purposefully or even on accident let a bad septic inspection go, and a closing is going to happen. And now the buyer is taking on a massive responsibility that they had no idea about, or they did know about it and didn't realize how bad it was going to be. Do you think this is going to be something that takes off with other counties, and if it truly is going into effect?
I am concerned because the counties are trying to save money and save manpower wherever they can. And they're trying not to, well, they're realizing they're not good at certain things, so they're used to it, but they're trying to help protect the box and protect the consumer, which is a great idea. But if they don't have the systems in place, they've just realized they're either doing way more that they're not able to do for manpower, or they're causing gaps in the system. Like, we don't want to be the one blamed for it. So just fine, you do it. And again, if you work with good professionals and make sure you do dot the I's and cross the T's, it's probably okay. But if you get people in the process that just want to hurry it through and not do it correctly, then, I mean, it's like speeding. Legally, you're not allowed to speed, but until you get caught, it's what it is. It's the same thing with this. The DNR will catch you, but if you, as a buyer, don't have good helpers, realtor, lender, attorney, whoever's helping with that transaction, it's scary because it's such a big dollar amount. So it concerns me, mainly because everybody gets excited and looking gets in the process, and you know what you want and you go. We want the same result, fast and clear. But we just don't want surprises for anybody, buyer, seller, after the fact, or the contractor didn't have enough money to do the fix, whatever it is. We want everybody happy after they're in their house.
And I think it's important too to note that, especially for first-time buyers that are listening in today, if you're buying a house in town, more than likely you don't have a septic system to worry about. You're more than likely hooked into the city sewer lines, and you don't have an individual septic system. There are certain parts of the Des Moines area that do have septic systems, especially the South of Grand neighborhoods, some of the older parts of Des Moines. And then once you start getting into the outskirts of town, that's where we're seeing a lot more septics, obviously. But if you're a first-time buyer listening to this and you're wondering, oh my gosh, I'm going to have this massive occurrence, if you're looking in town, more than likely you're not going to have to worry about it. Or if it's something newer, they're not putting in septic systems for most newer homes. They're typically, hooking that up to the city lines if it's possible. Something to keep in mind.
Anything that's in town, if it's close to main roads, then usually you've got that city water, city sewer. It's the pocket neighborhoods that are maybe kind of in the bend of the river and there's not an easy way in. And years ago, they just didn't have the sewer there. But it's one of those things, just ask. I mean, you don't have to be concerned about it. Just don't forget about it. Ask it. You have a, checkbox, how easy is it to commute? Does it have city water? Does it have its city sewer? It's on a standard disclosure. And so it's very easy to tell. And if you don't know, just ask.
And I think a couple of actionable steps. That's number one, is just ask. Number two is request a time of transfer inspection early. If you do find out that there is a septic system, request that right up front, right when you're starting the process, because if you find out this is going to be a $40,000-$50,000 repair and the seller doesn't have the money and you don't have the money, there's no reason falling in love with that property, as Charlie said. And if you can't find a way to get that money, then ultimately it's not a great purchase to move forward with, property, whatever. Next, I'd also say review the results and get estimates as needed, and then really plan for that future maintenance, because not only is this now just a one-time inspection, a one-time cost, we have that inspection done and it comes back positive. Maybe everything comes back fine. You got to keep in mind that that's going to have to be done again when you go to sell. So what are those maintenance items you need to be doing? Contact the local septic companies and find out what are certain things that I need to be doing specifically to my area. The ground is different in some areas. The houses are structured differently. I know there's an area down in Winterset that we own some land in, and we have to have a grinder pump installed to grind down the stuff. And, that's part of it to understand, because the pipes aren't that big, right? And so understanding what that is and what that looks like for the future, it's something that a home buyer needs to make sure they're aware of, because it's a cost they're going to have to replace.
And then septics are fantastic. It's nothing to be afraid of. I mean, you pay sewer fee every month on your water bill if you have city sewer. You don't pay that if you have a septic, but you do need to make sure. It's kind of like your heating and cooling. You need to get it checked once or twice a year, depends on your preference. But same thing, you're going to have your septic checked. Make sure it doesn't need the bills out. But you just have that on the hit list versus just ignore it. It doesn't exist.
Well, Charlie, I think this is enough talking about poo for me. I think we need to wrap this one up, and we're wrapping up the episode. You might need to run to the bathroom after this. I don't know. But we hope you enjoyed the conversation, maybe found it a little valuable today. Be sure to follow us all on social media platforms and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your shows. And remember, stay curious, and we'll see you next week on The Lofty Lender.